a cracked mirror, stale rosewater, a smear of blood on the cuff of a lace gown. The windows were shuttered, and the fire had burned too low. Outside, snow hissed faintly against the panes, muffled and constant. Inside Richmond Palace, time had started to rot. The candles burned low and irregular, their bases encased in half-melted wax. The Queen's chamber smelled of ointment, old silk, and something darker. Not death yet, but its precursor, the sour reek of the body failing quietly. They would later say her mind began to unravel sometime after the death of Catherine Howard's last servant, or perhaps after Robert Devereux was beheaded. That she never quite forgave herself. That she saw things. That she heard someone whispering in her ear, even when she was alone. This was the fate of a woman once called Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the sun around whom England revolved. Elizabeth Tudor, daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. She outlived every lover, every threat, every plot, and nearly every friend. Today we reveal the terrifying final days of Queen Elizabeth I, a slow-motion horror of mirrors, shadows, and a body that refused to die with dignity. By the winter of 1602, Elizabeth had grown increasingly reluctant to be seen in public. She was nearly 70, toothless, half-deaf, and wore thick layers of makeup to disguise the veins that webbed across her cheeks. Venetian ceruse, a lead base paste, gave her the signature ghostly complexion, but it also ate into her skin. Her face peeled beneath the makeup. It itched constantly. She scratched in her sleep. Physicians begged her to stop applying the compound. She refused. Her image was all she had left. Behind closed doors, she ordered mirrors removed from her rooms. But one, forgotten, cracked, and warped, remained hidden behind a tapestry. It showed her what she had become, the old woman who would not die. At night, her women claimed she muttered to herself, Latin, French, snatches of nursery, rhymes no one recognized. She refused her food, refused to sit, refused to sleep. She stood for hours, back crooked, knees trembling, in her chambers lit by a dozen flickering tapers. She swayed but did not fall. Doctors attempted to intervene. Their prescriptions varied: musk syrup, boiled plums, tincture of valerian. Nothing touched her. One bold physician recommended treacle and leeches for melancholy of the blood. Another suggested roasted pigeon applied to the soles of her feet. Her mood only darkened. There are fringe accounts that she took to tearing strips of lace from her gowns in the night. One maid claimed to have found her in a corner, muttering to a blank wall, her nails stained red from scratching the wooden panels. A second account describes her throwing a plate at a servant who dared to open the shutters. Historians still debate the cause. Was it senility, mercury poisoning from decades of ceruse use, or something more cerebral? A mind cracking beneath the weight of 60 years of power and paranoia? One thing was certain: the court began to fear her. Once the center of courtly spectacle, Elizabeth now radiated a disturbing energy. Courtiers made excuses not to attend her. Musicians claimed illness. The chapel choir sang softer. Her ladies whispered behind doors, wondering who among them would be dismissed next. She refused to change her clothes. For over 10 days, she wore the same embroidered black velvet gown. Its hem grew stiff. Her hair, once carefully arranged with wire cages and pearls, hung limp from her skull. Beneath it, sores wept down the nape of her neck. When asked to lie down, she replied, "Must is not a word to use to princes." Then she laughed, a wheezing rasp that did not reach her eyes. Despite her refusal to rest, her legs could no longer bear her weight. A cushion was brought. She rejected it. Then a stool. Then a pile of folded cloaks. She refused them all. "If I lie down," she whispered once, "I will not rise again." Some say she began hallucinating. A woman with a bleeding mouth. A boy with no eyes. A deer that spoke Latin. Her ladies dismissed it as fever, but when asked directly, Elizabeth's expression shifted. She would go still, as if listening to someone standing just behind the viewer. Then she would say nothing more. One evening, the Countess of Nottingham approached her with a sealed letter. Elizabeth stared at it for a long time, fingers twitching. "Is it from him?" she asked. The Countess dared not answer. The Queen dropped the letter into the fire without breaking the seal. No one knew who him was. Some said Robert Dudley. Others whispered about Thomas Seymour, long dead. One theory, more fringe, suggests she was speaking of her father. The stench in the chamber worsened. Staff burned herbs in shallow bowls to cover the scent. Rosemary, thyme, lavender. It did little. She perspired constantly, her body rejecting even cool linen cloths. The gown began to smell. No one dared press her to change it. Her last intelligible conversation came when her chaplain, Dr. Whitgift, visited her bedside and asked if she believed she had been a good queen. Elizabeth stared at him for a long time before replying, "I have sent too many to their deaths." He tried to comfort her. She waved him off. From then on, she spoke rarely. When she did, it was in riddles, or apologies, or nothing at all. And the mirror remained cracked and silent behind its tapestry. She never acknowledged it, but it faced the bed where she refused to lie, always facing her, always watching. By March, the palace was quiet in the way a crypt is quiet. No music, no laughter, only the sound of pacing footsteps in the night. Elizabeth's ladies took shifts watching her. None volunteered for the darkest hours. And still, she did not lie down. The walls breathed at night. Not literally, of course, but to those who kept vigil in the Queen's chambers, it felt that way. The ancient wooden beams of Richmond Palace groaned and whispered, stretching like sinew beneath the ceiling. Drafts crept through every crack, curling around ankles and undergowns. Doors that had been closed creaked open of their own accord. Tapestries shifted without a breeze. The Queen would not acknowledge these things, but she heard them, and they heard her. The courtiers called them whispers, nothing more than the groans of a dying house in winter. But Elizabeth seemed to recognize voices in the noise. She often turned her head sharply toward a corner of the room, eyes narrowing at empty space. Once, when a maid dropped a basin of warm water, Elizabeth screamed, not in fear, but in rage. "He'll hear us," she hissed. "He listens in the walls." She was not speaking of a living man. In those final weeks, she was never alone, and yet entirely isolated. Her closest confidants, Lady Scrope, Lady Warwick, and the ever-loyal Catherine Howard, not that Catherine Howard, began to exchange frightened glances behind her back. The Queen's waking hours had become a waking nightmare. She spoke to the dead. It began with simple mutterings. "Robin. Robin," she'd say, over and over. Most assumed she meant Robert Dudley, her lifelong companion, lover, and the man whose death in 1588 she never recovered from. But some suspected she meant Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, whose botched rebellion led to his execution, signed reluctantly by her own hand. Sometimes she used both names. Sometimes she wept. One night, Lady Scrope found the Queen curled in a velvet chair, whispering apologies to an invisible presence. "I should not have done it," she murmured. "He was just a boy. He smelled of milk still." The air in the chamber never seemed warm again after that. It wasn't only voices that plagued her. Elizabeth began to see things. Her women described her reactions as not of this world. She would fixate on shadows, speak to the fireplace, ask if they'd seen the boy with bleeding eyes. At first, the physicians blamed fever, but her pulse was often calm, her temperature oddly steady. One court gossip swore she'd asked whether her cousin Mary, dead and buried, had come to see her. When asked which Mary, she replied, "The one I could never trust. The one who wears her head like a brooch." Mary Stuart had been executed 16 years earlier, her head severed in 3 strikes. Elizabeth had wept for hours afterward, not from remorse, she claimed, but from duty. Now in her final days, it seemed Mary had returned. One story, apocryphal but persistent, tells of a moment when Elizabeth stopped mid-sentence during a meeting with Cecil and stared at the door. She standing there, the Queen whispered, head tucked under her arm, red lace gown. "The stain won't come out." Cecil left immediately and never returned to her bedchamber. Her counselors grew uneasy. If the Queen's mind was breaking, the realm would soon follow. There was no heir, no plan, no certainty. James VI of Scotland was the strongest candidate, but Elizabeth had never officially named him. Not yet. And so the walls of Richmond became not just haunted, but hunted. Eyes turned everywhere. Every gesture, every whisper from the Queen carried weight. Meanwhile, Elizabeth sank further into the murk of her own history. She spoke of her mother and Bullen, executed when Elizabeth was 2. "They never let me touch her," she once said, gazing at the coals. "They said she had the devil in her hair." When asked who said it, she did not reply. The fringe accounts get stranger. One of her ladies, a nervous girl named Margaret, claimed she saw the Queen laughing at an empty chair one morning. "He's sitting in it," Elizabeth said, "waiting. He smells of wax." Later that night, Margaret was dismissed and sent away without explanation. Other servants claimed the Queen refused to bathe, not out of vanity or pride, but out of fear. She believed the water would reveal her sins. Instead, her body was wiped with cloths soaked in rose water and mint vinegar. The scent only masked so much. Beneath the surface, her flesh had begun to blister and crack, especially behind the ears and beneath her arms. One doctor suspected invisible corruption. Another called it the damp of death. One afternoon, Elizabeth ordered her bed carried to the farthest corner of her chamber. "It moves closer at night," she whispered to Lady Warwick. "It wants me to lie down." That same evening, a book of Psalms was found open on her table. The page was smeared, as though someone had run damp fingers over the ink. The passage was from Psalm 88. "I am counted with them that go down into the pit. Thou hast laid me in the lowest pit, in darkness, in the deeps." The next morning, she tore the page out. Even her animals knew something was wrong. Her last dog, a small white lapdog named Mopsy, refused to enter her chamber after February. It barked when brought to her threshold and urinated on the floor. Eventually, it was sent away. Elizabeth did not ask where it went. In public, what little remained of it, she tried to maintain the old majesty. When Cecil begged her to meet with visiting ambassadors, she agreed, but only if the tapestries were drawn tightly and the candles dimmed. She sat upright, speaking slowly, voice rasping like parchment dragged over stone. After one such meeting, she collapsed the moment they left. When asked what she'd said to the ambassadors, she smiled faintly. "I told them I am still the lioness," she said. "But even lions grow tired of hunting ghosts." By March 14th, those who entered her chamber did so with breath held. The whispers had grown louder, or perhaps the Queen's hearing had sharpened. She began to press her ear to the wall at night, listening. Then one night she whispered, "They've started arguing." When asked who, she responded, "The ones waiting for me. They don't agree who gets me first." A chill settled across the palace that week. The tapestries trembled even when there was no breeze. And Elizabeth Tudor, Queen of England and Ireland, daughter of the most terrifying king the realm had ever known, remained standing. She still would not lie down. On the 17th night, she finally fell. Not asleep, not unconscious. She simply collapsed, her legs buckling beneath her, her gown fanning out like wilted feathers as she struck the floor. The sound was strangely soft, muffled by the velvet and the thick rugs underfoot. Her ladies rushed to her side, but she waved them away with a weak flutter of fingers. "I've gone and startled him," she whispered. There was no one else in the room. They lifted her gently, though she hissed at their touch, and placed her in a chair by the fire. Her head lolled slightly to the side, eyes fixed on something above the hearth. Her lips moved, but no sound came. For the first time in weeks, she sat still. The court had waited for this moment. The collapse. The moment her body acknowledged what her mind never would, that it was mortal. And now that it had come, they panicked. The doctors were summoned again. More physicians. More consultations. One insisted it was humoral exhaustion. Another diagnosed a disturbance of the animal spirits. Treacle was rubbed on her tongue. An egg was cracked into her wine. Prayers were mumbled. None of it mattered. Her body had decided. The long stand was over. Her eyes no longer tracked faces. She blinked slowly, as if underwater. She would not lie in her bed, but she let them build a sort of nest for her in the corner chair. Cushions, shawls, furs. There, propped up like a half-broken statue, she waited. Occasionally, she spoke. More often, she hummed, a tune no one recognized. Once or twice, someone tried to join in, but she fell silent when they did, as though the song was only meant for the dead. She was dying, but it would take time. And time in Richmond stretched. The walls grew colder. Food in the kitchens spoiled faster. Servants whispered of the rot, a creeping curse that began in the Queen's chamber and would soon spread through the palace. Whether metaphor or mold, it clung to the ceilings like mildew. The fires gave little heat. Candles flickered for no reason. Doors refused to stay latched. The Queen, for her part, became pale beyond the reach of human pallor. Her skin took on the waxy yellow of bone-pickled ivory. Her hands curled inward like claws. She had stopped eating entirely. One maid said her breath smelled like iron. Another said it was roses, dried, long dead. Then came the crows. It started with a single blackbird perched on the palace roof. But by the third day of her collapse, they arrived in flocks. Dozens. They circled the chimneys, settled on cornices, and picked at the icy soil in the gardens. When a servant tried to drive them off with a broom, they did not scatter. They stared. Richmond's older staff took it as a sign. "They've come for her soul," one cook muttered. "Or for what's left of it." Inside the palace, there was no official word. But everyone knew. The Queen was dying, and she was refusing to die. Physicians again begged her to take to bed. They said it was undignified, that she risked falling again, that her back would stiffen permanently. One even muttered about bed sores and body failure. She turned to him, slowly, and said, "You think I don't know what happens when flesh gives up?" He did not speak to her again. She was not in pain, at least not visibly. But there was something worse, clarity, the kind that comes only at the edge of death. When she spoke now, it was lucid, but horrifying. "I can feel them arguing still," she said one night. "The ones who want me. One wants my bones, another my breath, but the third he wants my name." That same night, the fire went out for no reason, though the embers had been fresh and dry. The room went silent. The Queen's head lolled forward. Her ladies thought she had died. Then she whispered, "He's behind the mirror again." The cracked mirror. The one still hidden behind the tapestry. It had not been moved. It was moved the next morning. Lady Scrope, with trembling hands, pried the tapestry back and removed the mirror, covering it with thick black cloth and carrying it out. She refused to say what she saw reflected. She left court that same day. Historians have dismissed this event as court hysteria, an old woman's paranoia infecting her staff. But others point out that Richmond's palace records show a sudden surge in household replacements during those final 2 weeks. 15 staff were dismissed, transferred, or disappeared entirely. Some never made it home. One footman, anonymous in the record, was said to have entered the Queen's chamber at night and emerged sobbing. He left the palace barefoot, muttering something about a face without skin. The Queen's silence grew heavier. By the end of March, she no longer responded to her name, but she responded to others. Whispers, murmurs, the sound of distant bells. Once, when the chapel bell rang for evening prayer, she jerked upright and screamed, "No, not now. I haven't chosen." Chosen what? Or whom? The question haunted the Privy Council. The Queen had still not named a successor. She had refused to write it, to say it aloud, to whisper it even to her confessor. Now, with her voice fading, the country teetered on the edge of chaos. Cecil tried one last time. He entered her chamber in silence and knelt beside her. Her eyes were open, staring at something above his head. He did not ask directly. Instead, he murmured a name, James. Her eyelids twitched. A breath left her lips, barely audible. Let it be James. That was all. The next morning, Cecil summoned messengers. Some historians claim she never said it, that it was Cecil's invention to smooth the succession and prevent civil war. Others insist she did name James, though whether as a blessing or a curse remains debated. Regardless, the court took it as truth. The country began to prepare for the death of its queen. But Elizabeth still lived, still breathing, still watching, still listening. They called it the Watch. For women, hand-picked from among the Queen's most trusted attendants, sat beside her day and night, rotating in silent shifts. They were not permitted to sleep, nor to speak unless spoken to. Their task was to observe, to wait, to bear witness. The Queen, curled in her corner like a raven draped in silk, had stopped speaking. Her lips moved, but no words emerged. Her hands, once praised for their elegance, were now drawn and twisted, clenched around the arms of the chair as if bracing for impact. Her body had grown so thin that her rings no longer fit. One slipped off and disappeared into the floorboards. It was never found. She refused all food, all drink, all warmth. Her attendants dabbed her lips with cloth soaked in honeyed water, but most of it dribbled away, trailing down her chin like golden tears. By the end of March, her skin was nearly translucent. Veins traced her throat like blue roots. A crust had begun to form at the corners of her eyes. Her nails darkened. Her breath came in shallow rasps, each one sounding like parchment being torn in slow motion. And yet, she remained alive. The physicians were baffled. Her pulse was faint, but steady. Her body, though starved, did not succumb to fever or seizure. One of the younger doctors, in a moment of whispered horror, called her half angel, half corpse. The others did not correct him. At night, strange smells began to emanate from the Queen's corner. Not decay, not exactly, but something older, something musty. It was the scent of forgotten crypts, of dried blood in stone chapels, of velvet long buried. It clung to her gowns and her pillows and followed her ladies out into the hall. They burned rosemary in her room. It did not help. Some swore she began to glow, not with light, but with absence. She seemed to absorb illumination rather than reflect it. Candles near her dimmed inexplicably. Fires flickered when she turned her face toward them. When one brave chambermaid tried to open a window to let in air, a gust blew every candle out. The Queen did not move. There was one remaining sign of will. She still would not lie down. By April 1st, they began to build her a throne bed hybrid, an elaborate recliner of pillows and boards that allowed her to rest at an angle without fully reclining. Even that she resisted. Not until he leaves, she rasped once, startling a sleeping attendant. He sits on the headboard, swinging his feet. The bed was removed the next day. More birds came. Not crows now, but owls. Silent, ghost-colored creatures that perched on the branches outside her chamber windows. No one knew where they had come from. None had been seen in Richmond before. One owl sat facing the Queen's window for 3 full nights. It did not blink. Meanwhile, the court began to fracture. Rumors seeped into every hallway. Some believed the Queen was already dead, and that her women were animating her like a marionette to delay succession. Others claimed she had cursed the land, and that whoever took the crown next would meet a worse fate. "Beware the Virgin's vengeance," a footman whispered. "She'll haunt whoever dares follow her." Behind closed doors, Cecil moved with calculated precision. Messengers were dispatched north to James. London readied itself for mourning. But still, they waited for the body, the symbol, the spectacle, and Elizabeth did not give it to them. Then, in the second week of April, her body began to change. The Queen had always worn heavy makeup, white lead to mask blemishes, vermilion to color her cheeks and lips, kohl for the lashes. In these last days, her attendants had ceased applying it. Her face had cracked beneath the powder. Ulcers had bloomed at the hairline, small and pink at first, then oozing slowly. Her hair, once a bright red that she enhanced with wigs, had thinned to a gray wire nest. Beneath the crown of jewels, her scalp flaked. Her eyes remained unchanged. That was the strangest thing. They did not glaze. They did not dim. They remained sharp, amber-colored, flickering. Her gaze could still silence a room. One doctor claimed that when he leaned close to listen for her breath, she looked directly at him and whispered, "Have you been measured for your coffin yet?" He fainted on the spot. Then, at last, she lay down. It was the early morning of March 23rd. The women on watch saw it first. She had shifted, slid from her upright posture, reclined against the pillows without protest. One of the ladies gasped, another began to pray. They knew what it meant. The deathbed was formed. The last rites prepared. The Archbishop of Canterbury was summoned, but not allowed to speak the ritual aloud. Elizabeth waved his book away. She wanted no Latin, no psalms, no clergy. He waits to catch the words, she whispered. If I speak them, he'll use them. They did not ask who he was. That night, her ladies cleaned her body. As they washed her feet, they found an old scar none had seen before, round, like a brand, deep and ridged. What's this? Asked one maid. The queen did not answer, but her lip curled in something like a smile. Childhood, she said, or punishment, or prophecy. The next morning, she closed her eyes for the first time in days. It is unclear how long she remained like that, breathing softly, eyes shut, mouth parted just slightly. A day, perhaps more. No one dared to touch her. The watch remained. The owls vanished. And then, at 3 in the morning on March 24th, 1603, the final breath came. It was not dramatic. No scream. No choking. Just a faint exhale, like a candle sighing out. Her chest did not rise again. Elizabeth Tudor was dead. She had ruled for 44 years. Never married. Never anointed a co-ruler. Never an heir of her own blood. The last Tudor monarch. The last true queen in her own right. Her body lay still for hours. Her skin already cooling. The wrinkles smoothed slightly. Her mouth was gently shut by Lady Warwick, who whispered, "Go peacefully, Majesty. There is nothing left to fight." But the queen had never believed that. Her ring, the famous signet with the portrait of her mother inside, was pried from her finger at dawn. The Privy Council sealed her chamber. Her body was wrapped in white linen. Her face was covered with a cloth that smelled faintly of lavender and something else no one could name. Later that day, a court painter was allowed in to sketch her. He left after 15 minutes, shaken. When asked what she looked like, he said only, "She was still watching me." They moved her at midnight, wrapped in veils and velvet, sealed in oak and lead. The Queen's body left Richmond Palace by river. The barge glided over the Thames like a coffin adrift through time, black drapes shivering in the wind, 6 lanterns flickering around her like ghostly mourners. The water was silent, save for the slow creak of oars. No crowds, no procession, no public, only whispers of an empress departing her stage. By daybreak, she had reached Whitehall, but the city already knew. The bell of St. Paul's tolled once, long, low, mournful. Then silence. London held its breath. The Privy Council made the announcement formally that morning. Elizabeth I, Queen of England and Ireland, was dead. James VI of Scotland had been proclaimed her heir. A Tudor was gone. A Stuart would now rule. But even as the court shifted, her absence did not feel clean. No cry of relief. No jubilation of peace. Just a quiet that crawled across England like mist. Inside Whitehall, her body was placed in the royal vault temporarily. Yet even dead, she did not rest. Attendants claimed her coffin moved at night, shifting slightly with the sound of wood on stone. One nobleman swore he heard tapping from within, though the lid remained sealed. The embalming was delayed. Some claimed it was the Queen's last resistance to decomposition, to becoming ordinary. Others said it was something stranger, her corpse refusing to yield to the knife. When the process finally began, the surgeon found her skin unusually tough, as if cured in life. Her organs were removed with reverence. They found no tumors, no burst veins, no clear cause of death. Just a heart that had stopped. Some took this as divine mystery, others as proof of unnatural force. What no one dared mention, the strange scar found on her chest just beneath the collarbone, like a sigil carved long ago. It had not been noted in life, and now it was too late to ask. Her funeral was scheduled for April 28th. Until then, her effigy would lie in state, a wax likeness painted to mimic her features, draped in a gown of gold and crimson. Visitors filed past it in awe, whispering prayers and secrets. Some claimed it blinked. One child swore it turned its head. The real body remained hidden. Even in death, she controlled the stage. When the procession finally came, it was immense. Thousands lined the streets. Black banners draped from windows. Bells rang across London. Nobles rode in black, the crown resting on a velvet cushion, borne behind a hearse pulled by 4 plumed horses. Her coffin was carried by 16 gentlemen in mourning cloaks. At the center of it all, the Queen's image rode, painted face, stiff collar, gaze fixed forward. But beneath the splendor, there was unease. The birds had returned. As the cortege moved toward Westminster Abbey, flocks of blackbirds followed, ravens and crows and jackdaws circling above, crying out in chaotic unison. Some landed on rooftops. Others swooped low over the heads of mourners. One flew directly into the face of a bishop, causing him to drop his psalter. He did not retrieve it. At the Abbey, she was finally lowered into the tomb, beside her sister Mary, beneath the stone that would read simply, "Partners in throne and grave." But history would remember only one of them, Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, the Shadow Monarch, Gloriana. And yet, as the final stone slid into place, sealing her in eternal darkness, those who had watched her die could not forget the final weeks. The silence, the standing, the whispers, the thing behind the mirror. A courtier once said she ruled as though the devil himself were her steward. Another whispered that perhaps she'd made a bargain. Today, scholars argue whether Elizabeth's death was dignified or disturbed. Some say she slipped peacefully into history, her legacy intact. Others believe she resisted the grave with all her will, that she lingered too long, walked too close to the line between mortal and myth. One scholar, reviewing the Watch diaries, posed a different question. What if she never truly left? After all, Richmond Palace would be torn down decades later, following tales of cold spots, phantom steps, and voices singing an unknown tune in the dark. Whitehall would burn, and Westminster's tomb remained sealed, but not untouched. In 1772, a worker reportedly heard knocking from within. No bodies were moved. No explanation given. Just another mystery in the long, decaying shadow of England's most terrifying queen. The fire has long gone out. The corridors of Richmond echo only with dust now, its ceilings collapsed, its mirrors removed, its secrets swallowed by time. But something lingers. The scent of wilted lavender. The hush of velvet against stone. The faint scrape of a chair dragged across an empty floor. There was a woman once who defied marriage, religion, parliament, even death itself. She stood when others begged her to rest. She watched the world shrink around her, and she refused to speak its name. Elizabeth Tudor, last of her line, ruled for 44 years with flame and frost in equal measure. She outlived lovers, rivals, poets, traitors. But in the end, she faced the oldest rival of all, and met him not with peace, but with posture. History has tried to flatten her into portraits, into speeches, into slogans. But behind the powder and pearls, there was always something wilder, something restless, something that did not want to end. And perhaps, somewhere deep beneath the stone of Westminster, she still waits. Not for resurrection, not for remembrance, but simply because she chooses to. So tonight, as you close the windows and dim the lights, remember her. The queen who would not lie down. The woman who stared death in the face and dared it to blink first. The air cools. The bells fall silent. And in the dark, a faint voice hums a tune no one else knows.